Ethan Blackwell's sleek black car rolled to a stop outside Aisha Johnson's Harlem apartment, its engine a low hum against the city's pulse. The billionaire's polished shoes hit the cracked sidewalk, his tailored coat out of place amid the graffiti and grit. His gray eyes, sharp with purpose, hid a flicker of guilt. Aisha, his maid, had faced his right-hand man's venom for too long. Victor's sneers, his cuts to her pay. Ethan clutched a letter, its words a bomb, proof of her stolen nursing career. He knocked, the door creaking open to reveal Aisha's world, her kids' laughter, her mother's frail cough, a fridge too empty. Her eyes, fierce and unyielding, met his, daring him to see her truth. What he saw wasn't just a maid, it was a warrior, a mother, a spark that would ignite his soul and unravel his empire. "You're lazy, Aisha, always dragging your feet, wasting my time." Victor Lang's voice sliced through the polished marble halls of Ethan Blackwell's Manhattan mansion, sharp as a blade, his face twisted with disdain. Aisha Johnson, 45, a black maid with calloused hands and a spine of steel, stood rigid in her crisp uniform, her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. Around them, other staff froze, eyes darting, as Victor, the 55-year-old white HR manager, loomed over her, his tailored suit a stark contrast to her threadbare sneakers. The accusation wasn't new, but today it carried venom, dripping with the kind of prejudice that burned deeper than words. "Mr. Lang, I finished every room on time," Aisha began, her voice steady but low, a shield against his onslaught. "Finished? You call that finished?" Victor cut her off, his finger jabbing toward a barely noticeable smudge on a guest room mirror. "This is why people like you don't belong in places like this." The words landed like a slap, raw and deliberate, the racial undertone unmistakable. Aisha's fists balled at her sides, nails biting into her palms, but she didn't flinch. Her dark eyes locked onto Victor's, unyielding, a silent defiance that only fueled his rage. Ethan Blackwell, the 50-year-old tech billionaire, stood at the edge of the grand staircase, unnoticed, his sharp gray eyes taking in the scene. He'd always seen Victor as efficient, a man who kept the mansion running like clockwork. Aisha, though, she was just another face in the staff roster, reliable, quiet, invisible, until now. Her stillness under Victor's tirade intrigued him, a flicker of curiosity sparking in his otherwise detached mind. Victor wasn't done. "I'm docking your pay, half for this week," he spat, stepping closer, his breath hot with authority. "And you're off weekend shifts. Maybe that'll teach you to respect this house." The dominoes fell fast. Aisha's hours slashed, her income gutted, her family's survival. 2 kids, a sick mother, now hanging by a thread. Her lips parted, a protest forming, but Victor raised a hand. "Not a word, or you're out the door." Aisha's chest heaved, her breath shallow, but she swallowed the fire in her throat. She wouldn't beg. Not here, not to him. The other maids whispered behind their hands, their pity stinging worse than Victor's words. Ethan shifted, his polished shoes silent on the marble, his mind snagging on Victor's phrase, "People like you." It wasn't just about work. It was about race, about power, about a system Ethan had never questioned. Aisha turned to leave, her movements deliberate, her worn canvas bag clutched tight against her hip. The weight of it seemed heavier than it should, as if it carried more than just her belongings. Ethan's gaze lingered on that bag, a question forming. Why did she guard it so fiercely? Victor stormed off, muttering about standards, leaving a tense silence in his wake. Aisha's shoulders stayed square, but her steps faltered slightly, a crack in her armor only Ethan caught. From his vantage point, Ethan felt a strange unease, like a stone lodged in his chest. He'd built an empire on efficiency, on numbers, but this felt wrong. Not just Victor's cruelty, but his own silence. He hadn't stopped it. Why? The question gnawed at him as Aisha disappeared through the staff door, her silhouette swallowed by the mansion's shadows. Something about her resilience, her refusal to break, stuck with him. And that bag, what was in it? A letter, maybe, or something else entirely. Whatever it was, It felt like the key to a door he hadn't yet opened. Aisha Johnson's sneakers scuffed the marble floor as she strode toward the staff exit, her canvas bag slung tight against her hip, each step a deliberate act of defiance. Victor's words, "People like you don't belong," still burned in her ears, a venomous echo that threatened to crack her resolve. But Aisha, 45, mother of two, caretaker of a diabetic mother, didn't bend. Her jaw stayed locked, teeth grinding so hard her temples throbbed. She wouldn't give Victor the satisfaction of seeing her break. Not in this Manhattan mansion where every polished surface screamed privilege. The other maids' whispers followed her, their pity sharp as knives. But Aisha kept her eyes forward, her spine a steel rod against the weight of their stares. She reached the locker room, her sanctuary of sorts, where the air smelled of bleach and sweat. Slamming her locker open, she shoved her apron inside, her fingers trembling, not from fear but from a rage she refused to unleash. "He thinks he can bury me," she muttered, her voice a low growl, barely audible. She caught her reflection in the locker's scratched mirror, dark circles under her eyes, skin taut from sleepless nights. Yet her gaze burned with a fire that hadn't dimmed in years. "One day, Victor, the truth will come for you, and I'll still be standing." Her words hung in the air, a vow, a prophecy, spoken to no one but herself. Upstairs, Ethan Blackwell lingered at the staircase, his polished shoes rooted to the spot. Aisha's final glance, those unyielding eyes, had lodged in his mind like a splinter. He'd seen staff disciplined before, but this was different. Her silence wasn't submission. It was a weapon, sharp and heavy, cutting through Victor's bluster. Ethan's fingers tightened on the banister, his knuckles whitening. Why did her words, that fleeting vow, feel like they were meant for him too? He didn't know her life, her story, but the way she carried herself, shoulders squared, chin high, screamed of a strength he'd never had to muster. Aisha grabbed her bag, checking its contents with a quick, practiced motion. Inside, a folded letter, yellowed and worn, pressed against a small photo of her kids, Malik and Nia. She didn't open it. She never did at work, but its weight grounded her, a reminder of why she endured. She zipped the bag shut, her lips pressing into a thin line. "For them," she whispered, her breath steadying. She wouldn't cry. Not here, where Victor's shadow still loomed, where the mansion's walls seemed to mock her existence. As she pushed through the staff door into the biting Manhattan air, Aisha's steps quickened, her worn jacket doing little against the chill. She didn't look back, didn't need to. The city's hum, honking cabs, distant sirens, swallowed her, but her mind stayed sharp, replaying Victor's sneer, his "people like you." It wasn't just about her. It was Malik's empty lunchbox, Nia's patched shoes, her mother's insulin vials running low. It was every black face in Harlem fighting the same fight, her fist clenched tighter around the bag's strap, her nails digging into the canvas. Ethan watched her silhouette vanish into the dusk, the staff door clicking shut with a finality that echoed in his chest. Her words, "The truth will come," rang in his head, a challenge he couldn't shake. He didn't know what truth she meant, but the weight of her silence, the fire in her eyes, told him it was bigger than a smudged mirror. His gaze dropped to the floor where a faint scuff mark from her sneakers lingered, a trace of her, defiant and unbroken. He needed to know more. About her, about that bag, about the truth she carried. Ethan Blackwell's polished shoes clicked against the marble as he descended the staircase, his pulse quickening. Aisha's words, "The truth will come," still slicing through his thoughts like a blade. The mansion's sterile silence mocked him, amplifying the unease clawing at his chest. He'd stood by while Victor tore into her, his silence complicit, and now her unyielding gaze burned in his memory. Aisha Johnson, the black maid he'd barely noticed before, had become a puzzle he couldn't ignore. Her defiance, her bag clutched like a lifeline, her cryptic vow, it all pointed to something deeper, something he'd missed in his world of boardrooms and balance sheets. He reached the staff corridor, the air heavy with the scent of cleaning chemicals. Aisha was gone, her shift ended, but her presence lingered. Ethan's eyes caught a glint on the floor near the locker room, a folded piece of paper, yellowed and creased, half tucked under a bench. His breath hitched. Had it fallen from her bag? He crouched, fingers brushing the rough edge, his heart thudding with a mix of guilt and curiosity. The paper was worn, as if handled 1,000 times its weight heavier than it should be. He didn't open it, not yet, but slipped it into his pocket, the act feeling like a theft. Back in his office, Ethan sat at his mahogany desk, the city skyline glaring through the window. He pulled the paper out, its edges fraying under his touch. It was a letter addressed to Aisha, dated 5 years ago. The words hit him like a punch. Unfair dismissal, racial bias, hospital records. Aisha had been a nurse, a damn good one, until a white supervisor, someone like Victor, pushed her out for insubordination after she challenged discriminatory patient care. The letter was from a lawyer, offering to fight the case, but a scribbled note in Aisha's handwriting read, "No money, no justice." Ethan's stomach twisted, his fingers gripping the paper so hard it crinkled. He leaned back, his jaw tight. The letter a burning indictment of his own ignorance. Victor's "people like you" wasn't just a jab. It was a system, one Ethan had profited from without question. Aisha's resilience, her refusal to break under Victor's cruelty, now made sense. She wasn't just a maid, she was a survivor, carrying the weight of a life stolen by prejudice. Ethan's mind flashed to her bag, the way she guarded it. What else was in there? More letters? More truths he'd never bothered to see? His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock. Victor strode in, his smirk as polished as his suit. "Problem handled, Mr. Blackwell. Aisha won't be an issue anymore." Ethan's blood surged, his fingers curling into fists beneath the desk. Victor's casual arrogance, his assumption that Ethan would nod along, ignited something raw. "You sure about that?" Ethan's voice was low, a warning Victor didn't catch. "She's replaceable," Victor said, shrugging. "Plenty of others out there." Ethan's eyes narrowed, the letter's weight heavy in his pocket. "Get out," he snapped, his tone ice cold. Victor blinked, caught off guard, but left without a word. Alone again, Ethan stood, pacing, the letter a burning reminder of his complicity. He'd let Victor run unchecked, let Aisha take the hit. Guilt gnawed at him, sharp and unrelenting. But so did curiosity. That bag, that letter, they were clues to a truth he needed to uncover. He moved to the window, Manhattan's lights pulsing below. Aisha was out there, in Harlem, carrying her burden alone. Ethan's mind snagged on a fleeting image. The scuff mark from her sneakers, a faint rebellion against the mansion's perfection. He didn't know her story, not yet, but he knew one thing. He'd been wrong to stay silent, and whatever truth Aisha carried, it was about to pull him into a world he'd never dared to face. Ethan Blackwell's fingers gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white as his sleek black sedan cut through Manhattan's neon-lit streets. The letter from Aisha's bag burned in his pocket, its words, unfair dismissal, racial bias, searing into his mind like a brand. Her vow, the truth'll come, echoed louder now, a taunt he couldn't shake. He let Victor's cruelty slide, stood silent as Aisha's life was gutted. Guilt churned in his gut, sharp and relentless. But it was her defiance, those unyielding eyes, that clenched jaw, that drove him now. He needed to find her, to face her, to make this right. The city blurred past, honking taxis, glowing billboards, until Harlem's dimmer streets came into view. Ethan had never set foot here, a world away from his penthouse empire. The GPS led him to a crumbling apartment block, its cracked facade a stark contrast to his mansion's polish. Aisha's address, pulled from employee records, felt like a trespass. He parked, his heart pounding, the letter a heavy anchor in his coat. Stepping out, he scanned the street, potholed sidewalks, flickering streetlights, kids playing in patched jackets. This was her world, and he was an intruder. He climbed the rusted stairwell, each creak amplifying his unease. Aisha's apartment, 2B, was at the end of a dim hallway. His fist hovered over the door, hesitating. What would he say? Sorry felt hollow, a rich man's platitude, but the image of her faltering steps, her bag clutched tight, pushed him forward. He knocked, the sound sharp against the muffled hum of TVs and arguments bleeding through thin walls. No answer. He knocked again, harder, his pulse racing. The door cracked open, and Aisha's face appeared, her eyes narrowing at the sight of him. "Mr. Blackwell?" Her voice was steel, no warmth, her body blocking the doorway like a shield. Behind her, a small living room flickered into view. Bare walls, a sagging couch, a plastic table where two kids, Malik and Nia, glanced up from homework. A faint smell of antiseptic lingered, hinting at her sick mother somewhere inside. "What do you want?" Aisha's words cut, her arms crossed, her worn jacket still on as if she just walked in. Ethan's throat tightened, the letter's weight screaming in his pocket. I, I saw what happened. With Victor." His voice cracked, unsteady. "It was wrong. I need to make it right." Aisha's jaw tightened, her gaze piercing. "Make it right? You stood there, watched him tear me down. Now you're here, what, to play savior?" Her words were a blade slicing through his intentions. She stepped forward, closing the door slightly, her kids' curious eyes still on them. "You don't know me. You don't know my life." Ethan's hands clenched, the letter crinkling in his pocket. "I found something. A letter. About your nursing job. What they did to you." He pulled it out, holding it like evidence, his fingers trembling. Aisha's eyes flicked to it, her breath catching, but she didn't reach for it. "I didn't know, Aisha. I should have stopped him." Her lips pressed into a thin line, her silence louder than any shout. "You think a letter fixes this? My kids go hungry. My mom's medicine runs out. Victor's not the only one who thinks I don't belong." Her voice shook, not with weakness, but with a fury she'd held back too long. Ethan's chest ached, her words exposing the chasm between their worlds. He'd built his empire on systems that crushed people like her, and he'd never looked twice. "I'm not here to fix it with words," he said, his voice firming. "I want to help. Tell me how." Aisha's eyes searched his, unyielding, looking for a lie. She found none, but her guard stayed up. "You want to help? Start with Victor. He's poison, and not just to me." She stepped back, her hand on the door. "But don't think this makes us even." The door clicked shut, leaving Ethan in the dim hallway, her words ringing in his ears. He turned, the letter still in his hand, its edges digging into his palm. Harlem's streets stretched out below, alive with struggle and resilience he'd never understood. Aisha's life was here, raw and real, and he'd only scratched the surface. But her challenge, start with Victor, was a gauntlet thrown. He'd find her again. He'd dig deeper. And that letter, it wasn't just her past. It was a key to something bigger, something buried in his own company's shadows. Aisha Johnson pushed through the creaking door of her Harlem apartment, her canvas bag slung over her shoulder, the weight of Ethan's visit still pressing on her chest. The dim living room smelled of antiseptic and yesterday's rice, a stark reminder of her mother's insulin vials running low. Her kids, Malik, 12, and Nia, 8, sat at the plastic table, their pencils scratching over worn textbooks. "Mama, who was that man?" Nia's voice piped up, her wide eyes curious but wary. Aisha's jaw tightened, her fingers brushing the bag where the letter, the one Ethan had found, still lay. She wouldn't let his pity, or whatever it was, crack her armor. Not now, not ever. She knelt beside Nia, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just someone from work, baby. Keep drawing." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she unpacked her bag. A half-eaten sandwich, a bottle of water, the letter she hadn't touched since Ethan waved it in her face. Her past as a nurse, stolen by a system that saw her skin before her skill, was a wound she'd buried. Yet here she was, still fighting, still standing. She glanced at Malik, his brow furrowed over math problems, and her heart clenched. This was why she endured Victor's venom, why she swallowed her rage. For them. Aisha moved to the tiny kitchen, her sneakers scuffing the cracked linoleum. She opened the fridge. 2 apples, a sliver of cheese, a jug of milk nearly empty. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it, slicing the cheese thin for the kids' dinner. Across the hall, her mother, Clara, coughed. a frail sound from the bedroom. Aisha's throat burned. Clara's diabetes was a ticking clock, and every missed dose pushed her closer to the edge. Aisha's fingers gripped the counter, her nails digging into the chipped wood. She wouldn't break, not in front of them. A knock at the door startled her. She froze, expecting Ethan again. But it was Mrs. Carter, the elderly neighbor, her face lined with worry. "Aisha, my heat's out again. Can you help?" Aisha nodded, her exhaustion a heavy weight she shoved aside. She grabbed a wrench from under the sink, her movements quick, practiced. In Harlem, she wasn't just a maid. She was a fixer, a lifeline. She'd patch pipes, shared food, sat with sick kids when their parents worked late. Her hands, calloused from years of scrubbing floors, still carried the precision of a nurse. In Mrs. Carter's apartment, Aisha tightened a valve, her breath steadying as the radiator hissed to life. "You're a blessing, girl," Mrs. Carter said, pressing a wrinkled hand to Aisha's arm. Aisha's lips twitched, a flicker of pride cutting through her fatigue. "Just doing what I can," she murmured, but her mind drifted to Ethan's words. "I want to help." Help? He didn't know what it meant to scrape by, to choose between medicine and food. Yet his eyes, raw with something like guilt, had stayed with her. Back in her apartment, Aisha sat with Malik and Nia, their small hands clutching sandwiches. "Mama, why you always helping everybody?" Malik asked, his voice sharp with a kid's bluntness. Aisha's chest ached, her fingers brushing his tight curls. "Because we're stronger together," she said, her voice firm, "no matter what they throw at us." Her words were a shield, a lesson forged in years of fighting systems that tried to crush her. She glanced at the bag, the letter inside a ghost of her old life. Ethan had seen it, but he didn't know the half of it. As the kids ate, Aisha stood, her gaze drifting to the window. Harlem's streets pulsed below, kids laughing, horns blaring, life refusing to quit. She was part of that pulse, unbroken despite Victor's cruelty, despite a world that told her she didn't belong. Her fingers tightened on the windowsill, her resolve afire that hadn't dimmed. Ethan thought he could make it right. But this wasn't just about her. It was about every face in this neighborhood, every story like hers. And whatever truth that letter held, she'd protect it until the time was right to let it burn. Aisha Johnson's fingers tightened on the doorknob, her pulse hammering as she faced Ethan Blackwell in her cramped Harlem apartment. His tailored coat looked absurd against the peeling paint of her hallway, his gray eyes raw with something she didn't trust. Guilt, maybe, or a rich man's need to play hero. The letter he'd found, the one exposing her stolen nursing career, dangled between them like a live wire. "You think waving that paper makes you understand?" she snapped, her voice a blade, her arms crossed tight to keep her rage in check. Malik and Nia's curious stares burned into her back from the living room, but she wouldn't let them see her waver. Ethan's jaw clenched, his hand still clutching the letter. "I don't understand, Aisha. That's why I'm here." His voice was low, stripped of the boardroom polish, but it didn't soften her. "Victor was wrong. I was wrong. Let me fix it." "Fix it?" Aisha's laugh was sharp, cutting. "You think money fixes a life? My kids eat scraps. My mom's dying slow because I can't afford her meds. Victor's not just one man. He's your whole damn system." Her words sliced, each one a release of years of swallowed fury. She stepped closer, her eyes locking onto his, unyielding. "You want to fix it? Fire Victor. Make him pay for what he's done to me, to others like me." Ethan's throat bobbed, her demand hitting like a fist. Fire Victor? His right-hand man? The one who kept his mansion running? But her eyes, fierce and unflinching, held a truth he couldn't dodge. "I'll deal with Victor," he said, his voice steadying. "But I need you to let me help. Not just you, your family." Aisha's lips pressed thin, her nails biting into her palms. Help from a man like him came with strings. She'd learned that the hard way. But Nia's cough from the living room, Clara's frail wheeze from the bedroom, pressed against her resolve. "Fine," she said, her voice ice. "But this isn't charity. I'll pay you back. Every cent. And you make sure Victor's gone, or I'm done talking." Ethan nodded, a spark of relief in his eyes, but Aisha wasn't finished. She stepped back, reaching for her canvas bag on the table. Her fingers brushed the letter, its edges worn from years of carrying her pain. But something else caught her eye. A small, folded note tucked inside, one she hadn't seen before. Her breath hitched as she pulled it out, her kid's eyes on her, Ethan's gaze heavy. The note was old, the ink faded, addressed to staff at Blackwell Industries, signed by a name she didn't know, James Carter. "What's that?" Ethan asked, his voice sharp with curiosity, stepping closer. Aisha's hand closed around the note, protective, her heart racing. "None of your business," she shot back, but her eyes scanned the words. Victor Lang, cover-up, wrongful death, 2015. Her stomach twisted, the pieces falling into place. Victor wasn't just a bully, he was hiding something bigger, something tied to Ethan's company. She stuffed the note back in her bag, her mind spinning. This wasn't just her fight anymore. Ethan caught the flicker of fear in her eyes, his own narrowing. "Aisha, if you know something, tell me." She shook her head, her guard slamming back up. "You want my trust? Earn it. Start with Victor, then we'll see." Her words were a challenge, a line drawn in the sand. She moved to the door, her hand on the knob. "You know where to find me. Don't come back until he's gone." The door clicked shut, leaving Ethan in the dim hallway, the weight of her conditions pressing on him like a vice. He turned, descending the creaking stairs, Harlem's pulse pounding around him, kids shouting, horns blaring, life refusing to quit. Aisha's world was raw, real, and he was barely scratching its surface. But that note, those words she wouldn't share, they were a bomb, waiting to detonate. He'd deal with Victor, but he'd also find out what Aisha was hiding. The truth was coming, and he was ready to chase it. Victor Lang's polished loafers clicked against the hardwood floor of Blackwell Industries' executive suite, his smirk sharp as a razor, despite the pink slip burning in his pocket. Fired? By Ethan Blackwell, the billionaire he'd served for a decade? The thought twisted his gut, but it wasn't defeat. It was fuel. His fingers curled into fists, his tailored suit tight against his tense shoulders as he stormed into the office of Margaret Blackwell, Ethan's older cousin and the company's ruthless legal counsel. The air smelled of leather and power, but Victor's eyes gleamed with something darker, vengeance. "You're late," Margaret snapped, her voice ice, her graying hair pulled into a severe bun. At 60, she was a hawk, her sharp features and sharper mind guarding the Blackwell Empire's secrets. "What's this about Ethan firing you?" She leaned forward, her manicured nails tapping the desk, her gaze dissecting him. Victor didn't flinch. "It's that maid, Aisha Johnson." His voice dripped venom, the name a curse. "She's got Ethan wrapped around her finger. Found some old letter, stirred him up. He's poking into things he shouldn't." He paced, his steps sharp, his mind racing back to the note Aisha had shown Ethan. "Victor, cover up, wrongful death, 2015. He'd buried that mess years ago, but Aisha's digging was a threat he couldn't ignore. Margaret's eyes narrowed, her fingers pausing. "Aisha, the black maid?" Her tone carried the same disdain Victor had wielded, a shared prejudice that bonded them. "What does she know?" "Too much," Victor spat, his jaw tight. "She's got a note, from Carter, about the hospital incident." His voice dropped, low and dangerous. "If Ethan keeps sniffing around, it's not just me who goes down. Your family's name, your precious empire, gets dragged through the mud." Margaret's lips curled, a predator's smile. "Then we stop her, quietly." She stood, her heels clicking, as she moved to a locked filing cabinet. Her fingers worked the key, pulling out a thin folder marked Confidential 2015. Inside were records, hospital complaints, a death certificate, a hush settlement. "James Carter," she said, her voice a hiss, "the whistleblower who wouldn't shut up, until he did." Victor's smirk returned, his confidence surging. "She's a nobody, a maid. We can bury her deeper than Carter." His mind flashed to Aisha's defiance, her unyielding eyes when he'd cut her pay. She'd always been trouble, but now she was a blade at his throat. "I'll handle her, scare her off. She's got kids, a sick mom. Leverage. Margaret's gaze hardened, her voice a whip. No mistakes, Victor. Ethan's soft, but he's not stupid. If he's with her, you don't touch him. Just her. She slid the folder across the desk, her fingers lingering on it. Get her to back off, or make her disappear. Victor nodded, his pulse quickening, a hunter scenting blood. He took the folder, its weight a promise of control. Aisha wasn't just a maid anymore. She was a threat to everything he'd built, everything Margaret guarded. He'd silenced voices before. He could do it again. She'll regret crossing me, he said, his voice a growl, her and her little family. As he turned to leave, Margaret's voice cut through. Victor, if this blows up, you're on your own. Her words were a warning, cold and final. Victor didn't respond, his hand on the door, his mind already plotting. Aisha's note, her accusations, her alliance with Ethan, they were sparks that could ignite a fire, but he'd snuffed them out. He'd done it before, in 2015, when James Carter's complaints about discriminatory practices at the hospital led to a patient's death. And Victor's cover-up to protect the Blackwell name. He stepped into the elevator, the folder tucked under his arm, his smirk fading into a scowl. Aisha's face flashed in his mind, her clenched jaw, her vow that the truth will come. She thought she could fight him. She'd learn. Harlem was her world, but he'd make it her cage. As the doors slid shut, the hum of the elevator mirrored the buzz in his veins. Aisha was a problem, but problems could be fixed. And he knew exactly where to start. With her kids, her mother, her life already stretched thin. Aisha Johnson's fingers trembled as she unfolded the crumpled note again, its faded ink a ticking bomb in her Harlem kitchen. The words Victor Lang, cover-up, wrongful death, 2015, burned into her eyes, each syllable a link to a past she'd fought to bury. Her kids, Malik and Nia, slept in the next room, their soft breaths a fragile shield against the storm brewing in her chest. Clara's cough rasped from the bedroom, a reminder of time running out. Aisha's jaw clenched, her nails digging into the worn table. Victor wasn't just a bully, he was a snake, slithering through her life, poisoning everything. And now Ethan Blackwell, the billionaire who'd promised to help, was her only shot at unmasking him. She grabbed her phone, her thumb hovering over Ethan's number. Trusting him felt like stepping onto thin ice. But that note, found after his visit, was no coincidence. It was a call to fight. She dialed, her voice low when he answered. Meet me, tomorrow, Harlem Community Center. We need to talk about Victor. She hung up before he could argue, her pulse hammering. This wasn't just her story anymore. It was bigger, darker, and she'd drag it into the light. The next morning, Aisha stood in the bustling community center, its walls plastered with flyers for food drives and job fairs. Her worn sneakers scuffed the floor, her canvas bag slung tight against her hip. Ethan arrived, his tailored coat drawing stares from locals, his gray eyes locked onto hers, sharp with purpose. You said Victor. What's the note? His voice was a demand, no pleasantries, matching her urgency. Aisha pulled the note from her bag, her fingers steady despite the fire in her veins. This came from someone who knew me at the hospital, says Victor pushed my firing. But it's more, wrongful death, 2015. He's hiding something, and it's tied to your company. Her words were a blade, cutting through the chatter around them. She handed him the note, watching his face tighten as he read. Ethan's jaw twitched, his knuckles whitening around the paper. James Carter, he muttered, the name from the note a spark in his memory. I heard it once, a whistleblower. Disappeared after a lawsuit against us. His eyes flicked to Aisha, guilt flashing. I didn't dig then. I should have. You're digging now, Aisha said, her voice steel. Start with your own records. Victor worked for you back then. Find out what he buried. She stepped closer, her gaze unyielding. But I'm not sitting back. I know people, hospital staff, old co-workers. They'll talk to me. Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. We split it. I'll hit the company files. You get your contacts. We meet again in 2 days. His tone was a pact, a line drawn. Aisha's lips pressed thin, but she agreed, her mind already mapping her next move. She started in Harlem, knocking on doors of former nurses she'd worked with. First was Lena, a gray-haired RN who'd seen Aisha's firing. Over coffee in a cramped diner, Lena's hands shook as she whispered. Victor was at the hospital, consulting for Blackwell Industries. He pushed complaints against black staff, said we were trouble. One patient died, negligence, covered up. James Carter tried to expose it. Aisha's chest tightened, her fingers gripping her mug. Lena slid her a faded hospital memo, naming Victor and a settlement for Carter's silence. Next, Aisha tracked down Marcus, a janitor from the hospital, now working nights at a bodega. His eyes darted nervously as he spoke. Carter was my friend. He had proof, emails, records, showing Victor fudged reports to protect the hospital. Then he was gone. Car accident, they said. I never bought it. He handed Aisha a USB drive, his voice low. Carter gave me this. Said it was his insurance. I never looked. Aisha's heart pounded as she pocketed the drive, her mind racing. Back home, she plugged it into her ancient laptop, her breath catching as files loaded, emails between Victor and a hospital exec, doctored patient charts, a death certificate for a woman named Sarah Tate, 2015. Negligence. Covered up. Victor's name was everywhere, a shadow tying it all to Blackwell Industries. Meanwhile, Ethan stormed through his company's archives, his hands rifling through dusty files in a locked basement office. His pulse surged as he found a sealed folder, 2015 marked closed case. Inside were legal documents, a settlement with James Carter, signed by Margaret Blackwell, Ethan's cousin, a non-disclosure agreement, a death certificate matching the one on Aisha's drive. Ethan's stomach twisted, his fingers gripping the papers. Victor hadn't just bullied Aisha, he'd silenced a whistleblower. Maybe worse, and Margaret had signed off on it. He called Aisha, his voice tight. I found it. Carter's case. My cousin was involved. This goes deeper than Victor. Aisha's voice crackled through the phone, fierce. Meet me now. I've got proof. Victor rigged the hospital records. A woman died because of it. She paused, her breath heavy. And Carter? Might not have been an accident. Ethan's blood ran cold, the folder heavy in his hand. They met at a quiet Harlem park, Aisha's eyes blazing as she handed him the USB. This is our weapon, she said, her voice a vow. But Victor's not alone. Someone's protecting him. Ethan's gaze hardened, the truth a blade in his chest. Margaret's name on those papers wasn't a coincidence. Aisha's defiance, her evidence, was pulling him into a fight he hadn't chosen. But he wouldn't back down. As they stood under the park's bare trees, the USB a burning weight in his pocket, Ethan knew they were closing in. But the shadows of 2015 were growing darker, and Victor's allies were watching. Aisha Johnson's breath steamed in the chilly Harlem park, her eyes blazing as she faced Ethan Blackwell under the skeletal branches of an oak. The USB drive, heavy with proof of Victor Lang's 2015 cover-up, burned in Ethan's pocket. Its contents, emails, doctored charts, a death certificate for Sarah Tate, tying Victor to a patient's death and James Carter's silencing. Aisha's canvas bag hung tight against her hip, her fingers twitching, ready to fight. Ethan's jaw was set, his tailored coat a stark contrast to the park's grit. But his gaze matched hers, fierce with a shared resolve. They'd uncovered fragments of a crime, but now the truth was about to break wide open. We've got him, Aisha said, her voice a low growl, cutting through the distant hum of traffic. Victor rigged the hospital records. Sarah Tate died because he buried complaints about understaffing. Black nurses like me took the fall. Her nails dug into her palms, the memory of her own firing, a fresh wound. And Carter? He knew. That's why he's gone. Ethan's fist clenched, the USB a live wire in his hand. My cousin Margaret signed the settlement. She knew. His voice was a blade, slicing through his own guilt. The folder he'd found marked Closed Case 2015 flashed in his mind. Margaret's signature, a non-disclosure agreement, a payout to Carter's family. This wasn't just Victor. It was my company, my family. Aisha's eyes narrowed, her stance unyielding. Your family let a woman die to save their name. And Carter? His accident was no accident. Her words hit like a fist, her gaze daring him to flinch. She pulled the faded hospital memo from her bag, the one Lena had given her, and shoved it into his hands. Read it. Victor and your cousin threatened Carter when he pushed for an investigation. He was dead a week later. Ethan scanned the memo, his pulse hammering. It was a directive from Blackwell Industries to the hospital, dated days before Carter's crash, ordering immediate resolution of his complaints. Victor's name was scrawled in the margins, a damning link. Ethan's stomach twisted, the truth crashing down. Victor, with Margaret's backing, had orchestrated a cover-up that cost lives. Sarah Tate's, Carter's, and nearly Aisha's. His company, his legacy, was built on blood. They killed him, Ethan said, his voice raw, barely above a whisper, to protect the bottom line. His fingers crushed the memo, his knuckles white. He looked at Aisha, her face a mask of fury and pain, and saw the cost of his blindness. I didn't know, but I do now. Aisha stepped closer, her breath sharp. Knowing's not enough. Victor's out there, and your cousin's still calling shots. They'll come for me next. My kids, my mom. Her voice cracked, not with fear, but with a mother's fire. We need more than this USB. We need to expose them, publicly. Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening like steel. We will, but we're not ready yet. We need the final piece, something they can't deny. His mind raced, piecing together the fragments, the emails, the death certificate, Margaret's signature. There's a board meeting in 3 days. If we can get this to the right people, we can end it. Aisha's lips pressed thin, her eyes searching his. You're risking your empire. Why? Because you're right, Ethan said, his voice steady, cutting through the cold air. This isn't just about you. It's about every life they've crushed, including mine. His admission hung between them, raw and unguarded, a billionaire facing his own complicity. Aisha's gaze softened, just a fraction, but her guard stayed up. Then don't let me down. She turned, her sneakers crunching on the gravel, her bag a silent vow to keep fighting. Ethan watched her go, the USB and memo heavy in his hands, the truth a blade now aimed at his own family. Victor and Margaret thought they'd buried 2015, but the ghosts were rising, and Aisha was their voice. Aisha Johnson's sneakers squeaked on the polished floor of Blackwell Industries' executive wing, her heart pounding like a drum as she clutched her canvas bag, the USB drive and hospital memo burning inside. The truth about Victor Lang's 2015 cover-up, Sarah Tate's death, James Carter's murder, had ignited a fire in her, but now she was walking into the lion's den. Ethan had warned her to stay away, to let him handle the board meeting, but Aisha wasn't one to sit back. Victor was out there, a snake coiled to strike, and she'd face him herself. She'd slipped into the building through a service entrance, her maid's badge still valid despite Victor's firing. The hallway was quiet, the hum of corporate power a stark contrast to Harlem's pulse. Her breath hitched as she neared Victor's old office, now a storage room for sensitive files. She'd overheard a janitor at the community center, a friend of Marcus, whisper that Victor had been seen sneaking back, rummaging for something. Aisha's gut told her it was evidence, something to bury the truth for good. The door was ajar, and there he was, Victor Lang, his tailored suit rumpled, his face a mask of fury as he rifled through a filing cabinet. Papers spilled onto the floor, his hands frantic. Aisha's pulse spiked, her fingers tightening on her bag. Looking for something? Her voice cut through the silence, sharp as a blade. Victor's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing to slits. You, he spat, his voice venomous. You just couldn't stay down, could you? He stepped forward, his loafers crunching on scattered papers, his bulk blocking her path to the door. You and your little crusade. You think you can touch me? Aisha's jaw clenched, her nails biting into her palms. I know what you did, Victor. Sarah Tate, James Carter. You covered up a death, maybe caused another. She pulled the USB from her bag, holding it like a weapon. This ends now. Victor's smirk was a razor, his hand darting to his pocket. You're out of your depth, Maid. He pulled out a flash drive of his own, identical to hers, and waved it. You think you're the only one with leverage? I've got copies of everything, enough to burn you and your kids if you push me. His voice dropped, a growl. Back off, or Malik and Nia won't have a mother. Her blood ran cold, his threat slicing through her like ice. Malik's tight curls, Nia's curious eyes flashed in her mind, but she didn't flinch. You don't scare me, she said, her voice steel, stepping closer despite the danger. You're done, Victor. Ethan knows. The board will know. Victor laughed, a cruel bark, and lunged, his hand grabbing her wrist. The USB clattered to the floor, and Aisha's free hand swung, her fist grazing his jaw. He staggered, his eyes blazing with rage. You'll regret that, he snarled, shoving her against the cabinet. Pain shot through her shoulder, but her resolve burned hotter. She kicked, her sneaker connecting with his shin, buying her a second to scramble for the USB. The door burst open, Ethan Blackwell charging in, his face a storm. Victor! His voice was a roar, his fist slamming into Victor's shoulder, sending him crashing into the desk. Papers flew, a lamp shattered, and Aisha snatched the USB, her breath ragged. Ethan stood between them, his chest heaving, his gray eyes locked on Victor. You're finished. Victor wiped blood from his lip, his smirk twisting. You think this stops with me, Blackwell? Your cousin's neck deep in this. You expose me. You expose your family. He straightened, his flash drive still in hand. Walk away or I'll take you all down. Aisha's heart pounded, her fingers tight around the USB. Victor's threat wasn't empty. Margaret's signature on those 2015 documents proved it, but Ethan's stance, unyielding, gave her fire. He's bluffing, she said, her voice steady despite the ache in her shoulder. He's got nothing without that drive. Victor's eyes flicked to the USB in her hand, his smirk faltering. He lunged again, but Ethan was faster, tackling him to the floor. The flash drive skidded across the room, and Aisha dove for it, her fingers closing around it as Victor's curses filled the air. She stood, both drives in her grip, her breath heavy but triumphant. Ethan pinned Victor down, his knee on his chest. You're done, he growled, his voice raw with betrayal. Security's coming. You won't touch her again. Aisha's eyes met Ethan's, a silent pact forming. Victor's threats, his drive, his alliance with Margaret, they were pieces of a puzzle they'd solve together. But as security's boots echoed in the hall, Aisha's gaze dropped to the drives in her hand. One held the truth, the other, Victor's lies. The board meeting was tomorrow, and the fight was far from over. Victor's glare burned into her, a promise of retaliation, but she stood tall, her fire unquenched. Aisha Johnson's hands shook as she gripped the two USB drives, one holding the truth about Victor Lang's 2015 cover-up, the other his twisted insurance policy. Her shoulder throbbed from where he'd slammed her against the cabinet, but her eyes burned with fire, unyielding even as security dragged Victor's cursing figure from the office. Ethan Blackwell stood beside her, his breath ragged, his tailored coat scuffed from tackling Victor. The air in Blackwell Industries' executive wing crackled with tension, the shattered lamp and scattered papers a testament to their fight. Aisha's heart pounded, her kids' faces, Malik's tight curls, Nia's wide eyes, fueling her resolve. Victor's threat, Malik and Nia won't have a mother, still cut like a blade, but she wouldn't break. Not now, not ever. We've got his drive, Ethan said, his voice low, steady, his gray eyes flicking to the USBs in her hand. But we need more. Something undeniable for the board tomorrow. His jaw clenched, Margaret's name, his cousin, Victor's ally, hanging between them like a guillotine. The hospital memo, the death certificate, the emails. They were damning, but Margaret could spin them, bury them in legal jargon. They needed a final nail, something to shatter her defenses. Aisha's lips pressed thin, her mind racing. Victor was looking for something in here, she said, her voice sharp, nodding at the filing cabinet. He wasn't just panicking, he knew something was still here. She stepped over the debris, her sneakers crunching glass, and yanked open the cabinet's bottom drawer. Her fingers rifled through folders, her pulse hammering as she scanned labels. Budgets, contracts, nothing useful. Then a slim, unmarked folder caught her eye, tucked behind the rest. She pulled it out, her breath catching. Ethan leaned in, his shoulder brushing hers, the contact electric but ignored. The folder held a single document, a handwritten ledger dated 2015, listing payments to a private investigator, a coroner, and a hospital exec. Victor's initials were scrawled next to each entry, but one name stood out: Margaret Blackwell, authorizing a final payment to resolve Carter issue. Aisha's stomach twisted, her nails digging into the paper. "This is it," she whispered, her voice a vow. "They paid to make Carter's death look like an accident." Ethan's face darkened, his fists clenching. "My own cousin." His voice was raw, betrayal cutting deep. "She didn't just cover it up. She orchestrated it." He took the ledger, his hands steady despite the storm in his eyes. "This ties her to Victor, to Carter's death, to everything." Aisha nodded, her resolve steel. "But we're not safe yet. Margaret's still in play. She'll know Victor's down and come for us." Her mind flashed to her apartment, to Clara's cough, to her kids' homework on the table. She couldn't let them become leverage. "We need to move fast. Get this to someone who can't be bought." Ethan's eyes met hers, a silent pact. "I know a journalist, Rachel Hayes. She's relentless, owes me a favor. She'll break this wide open." He pulled out his phone, his fingers flying as he typed a message. "Meet her tonight. Neutral ground. Harlem Diner, 8 p.m. Aisha's chest tightened, the weight of their plan pressing hard. She slipped the USBs and ledger into her bag, her fingers brushing the photo of Malik and Nia. "I'm coming with you," she said, her voice unyielding. "This is my fight too." The diner was a fluorescent-lit hole in the wall, its booths worn but warm with the hum of Harlem's late-night crowd. Aisha sat across from Ethan, her bag tucked under her feet, her eyes scanning the room for threats. Rachel Hayes slid into the booth, her sharp features and no-nonsense braid marking her as a woman who hunted truth. "Blackwell," she said, her voice dry. "You said this was big. Spill it." Aisha pushed the ledger across the table, her gaze steady. Victor Lang and Margaret Blackwell covered up a patient's death in 2015. Sarah Tate, they framed black nurses, silenced a whistleblower, James Carter. Then they killed him. Her words were a blade cutting through the diner's chatter. She slid the USBs next, her voice low. "This is the proof. Emails, charts, payments. All of it." Rachel's eyes widened as she scanned the ledger, her fingers flipping through the USB files on her laptop. "This is dynamite," she muttered, her voice tight. "But Margaret's got lawyers, connections. You sure you want to take her down?" Ethan's jaw tightened, his voice ice. "She's my cousin, and she's guilty. I'm done protecting her." Aisha's heart pounded, her fingers gripping the table. "It's not just about her. It's about every life they've crushed. My life. My kid's future." Her voice cracked, a mother's fire breaking through. "You publish this, Rachel. Make it loud." Rachel nodded, her lips curling into a grim smile. "Give me 24 hours. This hits the front page before the board meeting." She packed up the ledger and USBs in her bag and slipped out, leaving Aisha and Ethan in the booth, the weight of their victory tempered by fear. Aisha's eyes met Ethan's, her breath steadying. "We did it," she said, but her voice carried a warning. "But Margaret's not Victor. She won't go down easy." Ethan's hand brushed hers, a fleeting touch, his gaze fierce. "We're not done. Tomorrow we face the board. Together." Aisha nodded, her resolve a flame that wouldn't dim. She stood, her bag heavy with the fight she'd carried from Harlem to this moment. The diner's neon buzzed behind her, but her mind was on the boardroom, on Margaret's cold eyes, on the truth ready to explode. They had the evidence, but the war wasn't won. Not yet. Aisha Johnson stood at the edge of Blackwell Industries' boardroom, her heart hammering like a war drum, her canvas bag slung tight against her hip. The room's polished mahogany table gleamed under harsh lights, a stark contrast to her worn sneakers and the fire in her eyes. Ethan Blackwell stood beside her, his tailored suit crisp but his jaw clenched. The weight of their evidence, the USB drives, the ledger, the hospital memo, burning in his briefcase. Across the table, Margaret Blackwell sat, her gray buns severe, her cold eyes slicing through them like a blade. The board members, suits and stern faces, shifted uneasily, sensing the storm about to break. Aisha's breath caught Victor Lang's threat. Malik and Nia won't have a mother, echoing in her mind. But she straightened, her spine steel, her kids' faces fueling her. Rachel Hayes's article had hit the presses that morning, a front-page expose screaming, Blackwell cover-up, death, lies, and corporate greed. The USB's emails, the ledger's payments, Sarah Tate's death, James Carter's murder, it was all there, raw and undeniable. Now it was time to face Margaret. Ethan slammed the briefcase down, the sound a gunshot in the silent room. "This ends today," he said, his voice a growl, his gray eyes locked on his cousin. "Margaret, you buried a patient's death. You silenced a whistleblower. You and Victor built a lie that cost lives." He pulled out the ledger, its handwritten entries, Victor's initials, Margaret's authorization, glaring under the lights. "It's over." Margaret's lips curled, a predator's smirk. "You're betraying your own blood, Ethan?" she hissed, her voice ice. "This company is our legacy. You think you can tear it down with a Maid sob story?" Her gaze flicked to Aisha, venomous, dismissing her as nothing. Aisha's fist clenched, her nails biting into her palms. "I'm not your maid today," she snapped, stepping forward, her voice a blade cutting through Margaret's disdain. "Sarah Tate died because you and Victor ignored understaffing. You framed black nurses like me to save your name. James Carter called you out, and you had him killed." She pulled the hospital memo from her bag, slamming it on the table. "This is your signature, Margaret. You paid to make it go away." The board members gasped, their eyes darting to the memo, then to Margaret. Her smirk faltered, but she leaned forward, her voice a whip. "You have no proof. Papers can be faked. You're a nobody, Aisha. And Ethan? You're throwing away your empire for her." Ethan's hand slammed the table, his voice thunder. "The proof is public, Margaret. Rachel Hayes has everything. Emails, charts, your payments. It's on every newsstand. You can't spin this." He tossed the USBs onto the table, their clatter a death knell. "You're done." Aisha's heart pounded, her eyes locked on Margaret's, unyielding. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice steady, a mother's fire breaking through. "It's about every person you've crushed. My kids deserve a world where people like you don't win." Her words hung in the air, a vow, a challenge, as the board members whispered, their faces pale. Margaret stood, her heels clicking, her composure cracking. "You think you've won?" she spat, her eyes blazing. "This company is bigger than you, Ethan. Bigger than her." She pointed at Aisha, her finger trembling. "You'll regret this." Before Ethan could respond, the board's chairman, Harold, stood, his voice gravelly. "Enough, Margaret. The evidence is clear. You're suspended pending investigation. Security will escort you out." He nodded to the guards at the door, their boots heavy as they approached. Margaret's face twisted, a snarl of defiance, but she didn't resist as they led her away. Her parting glare burned into Aisha, a promise of retaliation, but Aisha stood tall, her breath steady. The boardroom fell silent, the air thick with the weight of justice, fragile but real. Ethan turned to Aisha, his eyes raw, a flicker of relief breaking through. "You did it," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "You brought them down." Aisha's lips pressed thin, her fingers brushing her bag, the photo of Malik and Nia grounding her. "We did it," she corrected, her voice firm. "But it's not over. People like Margaret, they don't stop." She stepped closer, her gaze fierce. "We keep fighting. For Sarah, for Carter, for everyone." Ethan nodded, his resolve mirroring hers. "Together," he said, a pact sealed in the wreckage of his family's legacy. As they left the boardroom, Aisha's sneakers echoed in the hall, each step a victory, but her heart stayed heavy. Harlem waited for her, Malik, Nia, Clara, and the fight for their future was far from won. The truth had broken free, but Margaret's glare lingered in her mind, a shadow promising more battles. Aisha gripped her bag, her fire unquenched, ready for whatever came next. Aisha Johnson's sneakers crunched on the Harlem sidewalk, her canvas bag heavy with the weight of victory and dread. The night air was sharp, carrying the hum of distant sirens and the chatter of neighbors, but her heart pounded with the echo of Margaret Blackwell's parting glare. The boardroom showdown had exposed Victor Lang and Margaret's crimes, Sarah Tate's death, James Carter's murder, the cover-up that crushed Aisha's nursing career. But the fight felt far from over. Her kids, Malik and Naya, were safe at home with Clara, but Margaret's words, "You'll regret this," clung to her like a shadow, a threat she couldn't shake. Ethan Blackwell walked beside her, his tailored coat scuffed, his gray eyes scanning the street for threats. The USB drives, the ledger, the hospital memo, they'd handed them to Rachel Hayes, and her expose was spreading like wildfire, trending on X, lighting up newsstands. But Ethan's jaw was tight, his silence heavy. "Margaret won't stop," he said, his voice low, cutting through the city's pulse. "She's got connections. Lawyers, maybe worse. We need to be ready." Aisha's fingers tightened on her bag, her nails digging into the canvas. "Ready? I've been fighting my whole life." Her voice was steel, but her chest ached, picturing Malik's math homework, Nia's drawings, Clara's insulin vials. "They came for my family once. They try again. They'll see what I'm made of." Ethan's gaze flicked to her, a flicker of awe breaking through his tension. "You're stronger than anyone I know," he said, his voice raw. "But this is my fight, too. I let this happen. Victor, Margaret, all of it. I won't let them touch you again." They reached Aisha's apartment block, the cracked facade looming under flickering streetlights. Aisha paused, her hand on the rusted stairwell door, her eyes searching Ethan's. "You're not my savior," she said, her tone sharp but softer than before. "But you're in this now. Don't back out." He nodded, a pact sealed. "I'm not going anywhere." Inside, Aisha's apartment was a sanctuary, the smell of antiseptic and rice grounding her. Malik and Nia rushed to her, their arms wrapping around her waist. "Mama, you okay?" Malik's voice was sharp, his eyes too wise for 12. Aisha knelt, her hands cupping their faces, her heart swelling. "I'm fine, baby. We're gonna be fine." Clara's cough rasped from the bedroom, weaker now, but Aisha's resolve burned hotter. She'd won a battle, but the war for her family's future raged on. Her phone buzzed, a text from Rachel Hayes. "Story's viral. Feds are sniffing around Blackwell Industries. Stay safe." Aisha's breath caught, her fingers trembling as she showed Ethan. The feds? Margaret's connections might slow them, but the truth was out, unstoppable. Yet danger lingered. Margaret wasn't Victor, a snake who lashed out. She was a hawk, patient, deadly, waiting for her moment. Aisha tucked the kids into bed, their soft breaths steadying her. She sat at the kitchen table, her bag open, the photo of Malik and Nia beside her. Ethan stood by the window, his silhouette sharp against Harlem's glow. "What now?" he asked, his voice low, heavy with the weight of their shared fight. Aisha's eyes traced the photo, her voice steady. "We watch. We wait. Margaret's not done, but neither are we." She stood, her sneakers scuffing the linoleum, her gaze meeting his. "You've got your empire to fix. I've got my family to protect. But we do it together." Ethan's lips twitched, a rare half-smile. Together. As he left, Aisha locked the door, her fingers lingering on the bolt. Harlem's pulse thrummed outside. Kids laughing, horns blaring, life refusing to quit. She was part of that pulse, a fighter forged in its streets, her fire unquenched. Margaret's threat loomed, but Aisha had faced worse. Victor's venom, a system that tried to crush her. The truth was free. The feds were closing in, and she'd stand tall, ready for whatever came next, her kid's future a flame she'd never let die. Aisha Johnson sat at her Harlem kitchen table, the morning sun slicing through the cracked blinds, casting stripes across her worn linoleum floor. Her canvas bag rested beside her, empty now of the USB drives and ledger that had toppled Victor Lang and Margaret Blackwell. The fight had left scars. Her shoulder still ached from Victor's attack, and Margaret's threat, "You'll regret this," lingered like a ghost. But Aisha's heart was steady, her kids' laughter, Malik's sharp wit, Naya's bright giggle, filling the apartment, grounding her. Clara's cough was softer today, her meds secured thanks to Ethan's loan, a debt Aisha was already repaying with her reinstated job. The truth had broken free, but the war wasn't over until her family was safe for good. Her phone buzzed, a news alert from Rachel Hayes' outlet. Blackwell Industries faces federal charges. Margaret Blackwell indicted. Aisha's breath caught, her fingers tightening on the phone. The feds had moved fast. Rachel's expose, fueled by the USB's, ledger, and hospital memo, unleashing a storm. Victor was in custody, his flash drive useless against the evidence Aisha and Ethan had delivered. Margaret, stripped of her boardroom throne, faced charges for conspiracy and obstruction of justice. The Blackwell empire was crumbling, but Aisha knew hawks like Margaret didn't fall quietly. Ethan Blackwell knocked softly, his silhouette filling the doorway. His tailored coat was gone, replaced by a simple jacket, his gray eyes carrying a weight that matched her own. "It's done," he said, stepping inside, his voice low but firm. "Margaret's lawyers can't save her. The feds have everything." He set a folder on the table. Legal papers, a new Blackwell Industries policy. "I'm restructuring the company. No more cover-ups, no more victors. And I'm setting up a fund. Reparations for Sarah Tate's family, for Carter's, for every nurse they targeted." Aisha's jaw tightened, her eyes scanning the papers. Reparations were a start, but words on a page didn't erase years of pain. "Sounds good," she said, her voice sharp but softer than before. "But I'm not here for your promises. I want my life back. My nursing license, my career." Her fingers brushed the photo of Malik and Nia, her fire burning for them. "You owe me that." Ethan nodded, his gaze steady. "I've got a lawyer working on it. Pro bono. Your record's being cleared. Unfair dismissal overturned. You'll be a nurse again, Aisha. I'll make sure of it." His voice carried a vow, not pity, but partnership. "And I'm hiring you as a consultant, to keep us honest. You name your price." Aisha's lips pressed thin, her pride warring with pragmatism. A consultant? It was power, a seat at the table she'd been denied. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. "I'll take it, but I'm not your token. I speak for Harlem, for every worker you've ignored. You cross me, I walk." Her voice was steel, a line drawn, but a flicker of trust sparked in her chest. Ethan had fought beside her, bled for the truth. That counted. He extended his hand, a deal offered. Aisha took it, her grip firm, her calloused fingers a testament to her fight. "Together," she said, echoing their pact from the boardroom, her voice a quiet fire. Malik and Nia peeked from the living room, their eyes wide, sensing the shift. Clara's voice called softly, "Aisha, you okay?" Aisha smiled, her heart swelling. "Better than ever, Mama." Later, Aisha stood on her apartment's fire escape, Harlem's pulse thrumming below. Kids playing, horns blaring, life unbroken. The Fed's investigation would dig deeper, and Margaret's connections might still bite. But Aisha was ready. She'd faced Victor's venom, Margaret's ice, a system built to crush her. Now, with her nursing license in sight and her voice amplified, she was more than a maid, more than a victim. She was a force, forged in Harlem streets, her kid's future a flame she'd guard with her life. Ethan joined her, his breath steaming in the cool air. "You changed everything," he said, his voice raw. "I was blind. You opened my eyes." Aisha's gaze stayed on the skyline, her voice steady. "Keep them open, Ethan. This world doesn't change easy." She turned to him, her eyes fierce but warm. "But we did it once. Now we can do it again." As the sun dipped, casting Harlem in gold, Aisha's resolve burned brighter. The truth had won, but her fight for Malik, Nia, Clara, and every soul like them would never end. She was home, unbroken, ready for whatever came next. Aisha Johnson stood in the Harlem Community Center, the hum of voices and the clatter of chairs filling the air as she adjusted the microphone. Her navy scrubs, crisp and new, hugged her frame, a badge of her reinstated nursing license pinned proudly to her chest. Months had passed since Margaret Blackwell's indictment, since Victor Lang's conviction, since the truth about Sarah Tate and James Carter tore through Blackwell Industries like a wildfire. Aisha's canvas bag, once heavy with damning evidence, now held medical textbooks and a speech she'd written late at night, her kids' laughter in the background. Tonight she was no maid. She was a voice, a leader, speaking to her community about justice and resilience. The room buzzed with faces from Harlem, neighbors, nurses, families like hers, their eyes fixed on her. Malik and Nia sat in the front row, their smiles wide, Clara beside them, her breathing easier with steady meds. Ethan Blackwell stood at the back, his jacket simple, his gray eyes steady with quiet pride. Their pact, forged in the boardroom and sealed on her fire escape, had held. He'd kept his word. Her nursing career was back, her record cleared, and her role as a consultant at Blackwell Industries gave her a platform to demand change. But Aisha's fight was bigger now, rooted in the streets that raised her. She tapped the mic, her voice clear, cutting through the chatter. I stood up to a system that tried to break me, she began, her words steady, a fire kindled in Harlem's grit. They took my job, my dignity, but they couldn't take my voice. Sarah Tate, James Carter, they deserve better. We all do. Her gaze swept the room, her nails no longer biting into her palms but resting confidently on the podium. We fought for the truth and we won. But this is just the start. We keep fighting. For our kids, our futures, for every one of us they tried to erase. The crowd erupted, applause thundering, Malik and Naya cheering loudest. Aisha's heart swelled, her eyes catching Ethan's. He nodded, a silent vow to keep fighting beside her. But her speech wasn't just for them. It was for Lena, Marcus, every nurse and worker who'd been silenced. She stepped down, her sneakers soft on the floor, and hugged her kids, their arms grounding her. Clara's frail hand squeezed hers, whispering, You did it, baby. Outside, under Harlem's twinkling lights, Aisha and Ethan walked, the city's pulse alive around them. You were incredible, he said, his voice raw, the billionaire stripped to a man humbled by her strength. You're changing more than my company. You're changing me. Aisha's lips curved, not a smile but a challenge. Good. Stay changed. Her voice was firm, her eyes on the skyline. This city's got more stories like mine. More fights are waiting. I'm not stopping. She glanced at him, her gaze softening but fierce. You still in? Always, Ethan said, his hand brushing hers, a fleeting touch that carried their shared scars. The fund's growing. More reparations, more support for nurses like you, and I'm pushing the board to hire from Harlem to listen to you. His voice held a vow, not of pity, but of partnership. Aisha nodded, her scrubs a second skin, her bag light but her purpose heavy. Then let's keep going. For Malik, Naya, for every kid out here. Her words were a promise, her fire unquenched. Harlem's streets stretched before her, potholes, laughter, resilience, and she was its heartbeat, ready for the next battle. Margaret's shadow might still lurk, the system's weight ever present, but Aisha was forged in struggle, her kid's future a flame she'd never let die. Aisha Johnson's journey in Harlem teaches us that resilience and truth can topple even the mightiest empires. Her fight against corruption, fueled by love for her family and community, reminds us that one voice, unyielding, can spark change. We all carry stories of struggle and strength. Share yours in the comments below. What battles have you fought and what keeps your fire burning? Thank you for joining us in this story. Stay fierce, stay true, and we'll see you next time.